The loss of our land actually occurred when the Arab conquest took place in the 7th century. The Arabs burst out from Arabia, and they did something that no other conqueror, not the Romans, not the Byzantines, not the Greeks before them, not Alexander the Great, nobody did before. They actually started taking over the land of the Jewish farmer. They brought in military colonies that took over the land. And gradually, over the next 2 centuries, the Jews became a minority in our land. So it is under the Arab conquest that the Jews lost their homeland.
Hello friends, hello and welcome to one more episode of Educated Muslim. Friends, have you seen the Muslims supporting Palestinians against their war with Israelites or the Jews in the Palestine-Israel conflict? Whereas they do not know what was the cause of the conflict or why the conflict is there, why it should be solved, how it should be solved. They don't really care. All that they know is that they are going to support the Palestinians. Do you know why it is so? There is an Islamic concept called al-wala wa al-bara. This is a binding on all Muslims to support a Muslim in a conflict with the non-Muslim. So when a Muslim is in conflict with a non-Muslim, another Muslim is bound to support the Muslim irrespective of who is right and who is wrong. And that is exactly the reason why all Muslims support the Palestinians. But then we should not be like the Muslims. And the Muslims who are in this channel, who happen to come to this channel and watch this video, needs to know what is the truth. And let the truth convict them and not the concept of al-wala wa al-bara. So let's get started. So let's look at the recent history of how things evolved. After the October 7th attack by the Palestinians on the Israeli civilians, where 1,200 civilians and over 400 military persons were killed, and many more were taken as captives by the Palestinians. As of now, 101 captives are still held, dead or alive, with the Palestinians, and the negotiations would be starting for that. But then, let us look at the propaganda which has happened. There has been a huge propaganda by Islamists, by the Arab propaganda chiefs, and certain leftist organizations in the West. What was their propaganda? They used to put up placards, videos, social media, posters, all those things, which says from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And those people who went for those protests, they themselves don't know which river, which sea. When you ask them, which river are you talking about? They don't know. Which sea? They do not know. Some get angry. And this pent-up anger is towards whom? They think that Israel is killing all the Palestinians. And for that, these advertisers or these propagandists use the word genocide. Time and time and again, they say that Israel is doing genocide of the Palestinians, which is very untrue. Let me show you one of those videos of the protesters. There has been some protests in the Western countries, and when you interview those people who go for the protests, they have got no clue what are they protesting for. Listen to this and have a hearty laugh before we continue.
So I just noticed the signs that you got from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean?
Well, it's quite self-explanatory. It needs to be.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it? Because I guess what I mean is, how would that come about? What would happen to the Israelis, etc.?
I don't.
I'm trying to think of how to word it. Isn't it just as self-explanatory as the area of land? It's Palestine's land.
Yeah. So when you say Palestine, which bit do you mean?
Yeah, the Gaza Strip.
So the Gaza Strip?
The West Bank.
West Bank?
Yeah.
That's it?
So this is the kind of people who come and protest on behalf of the Palestinians. When you ask which river, which sea, they have got no clue. And then people say that the land of Palestinian or the land of Palestine is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So my question is, before October 7th, who was governing the Gaza Strip? It was the Hamas, which is the Palestinian terrorist group. Palestinian people, they elected Hamas as their rulers, isn't it? Who is governing the West Bank? It is the Fatah group, the PLO of Yasser Arafat. Who is the one who coined the word Palestinians on behalf of these Arab people? You know, the Arab language does not have the alphabet P or equivalent to P. They cannot spell Palestine, potato, Pakistan. All those words with P, they cannot have it because that is not there in the Arabic alphabets, Arabic lexicon. They can at the best call themselves as Palestinians. That is how it works. Now, this is the kind of misinformation that is, engineered to kind of put up such a big facade of protests against the Israeli government and Israel. But what is the truth? Did the Palestinians ever own the land as has been claimed by these Arabs and these Islamic propagandists? We need to know the truth. So, who best can tell us the truth other than the Israeli Prime Minister? Remember, the Israeli Prime Minister is in a position of authority, and Israel is a country of the UN. He just cannot blurt out anything, just like how Mehdi Hassan or, Cenk Uyghur or anybody else who says, because they just have this lying machine working 24/7 in their mouth. But then Netanyahu cannot tell that. So let's ask the Prime Minister of Israel, what is the true history of Israel? Let's listen to that.
Jewish people have lived in the land of Israel, what is now the state of Israel, have lived here and have been attached to this place for about 3,500 years. 3.5 millennia. Now, for the first 2 millennia, roughly, of that time, we were living in what is described in a text commonly known as the Bible. So the Bible describes how the Jewish people lived on this land, were attached to this land, fought off conquerors, sometimes were conquered, but stayed on their land. And that continued for a very long time until roughly the 6th, 7th century, actually, after the birth of Christ, okay? For roughly 2,000 years. We were conquered by the Romans, we were conquered by the Byzantines. They did a lot of bad things to us, but they didn't really exile us, contrary to what people think, okay? The loss of our land actually occurred when the Arab conquest took place in the 7th century. The Arabs burst out from Arabia, and they did something that no other conqueror, not the Romans, not the Byzantines, not the Greeks before them, not Alexander the Great, nobody did before. They actually started taking over the land of the Jewish farmer. They brought in military colonies that took over the land. And gradually, over the next 2 centuries, the Jews became a minority in our land. So it is under the Arab conquest that the Jews lost their homeland. The Arabs were the colonials. The Jews were the natives dispossessed. Well, that happens in history. The Jews were dispossessed. We were flung to the far corners of the earth, suffered unimaginable suffering because we had no homeland. But we didn't disappear, and we never gave up the dream of coming back to our ancestral homeland. So generation after generation, the Jews could be in Warsaw, they could be in Yemen, they could be in China. And they said, next year in Jerusalem, we'll come back next year in Jerusalem. Well, that was made possible because the Arabs who had conquered the land basically left it barren. They never made it their own. It was a barren land. It really had, practically it was an empty land. And in the 19th century, the idea of coming back next year in Jerusalem became a reality. By the way, in part because of Christian Zionist support for the idea of the Great Return. The Jews came back in the 19th century to the land of Israel. The result of this return was that we started building farms, factories, places of employment, Arabs from nearby countries started immigrating, and they called themselves Palestinians. They reconstructed history and said, we've been here for centuries. No, they haven't. They weren't there at all, and they didn't have a national consciousness. We came back, made it our land, and we said, okay, we now will live together. We decided to establish a state in 1948. That's 75 years ago. And we said, everybody can live here. The Arabs said, there can't be a Jewish state. You have no right to be here. It's our land. It's not your land. It's been our land for 3,500 years. If you took over somebody's apartment, knocked them out, dispossessed them, and they never gave up the claim, they said, it's our claim, and you left this barren dump, okay? And the families, the progeny of the people you kicked out, came back, rebuilt the house. You cannot come back and tell them, you don't belong here, we're going to kick you out, especially since you're latecomers who've come to live in part of the house, which is what the so-called Palestinians are, okay? We say to them, you can live here, we can live here, but it's our land, it's our state. And the reason this conflict continues is because the Palestinians, who represent the colonial powers, the Arab conquest of the Middle East and beyond, they're saying, you have no right for a Jewish state. Well, we do. If any people has any right to a state, if any people never gave up their dreams of returning to their ancestral home, if any people rebuilt their home from nothing, from barren, wasted land, it's the Jewish people. To tell them, you have suffered more than anyone else. You have never lost your dream of coming back and rebuilding your national life in your ancestral homeland. You have no right to be there. But the Arabs who are trying to destroy you, they have that right. That is a complete perversion of history and also a complete perversion of justice. The Jews belong to this land belongs to the Jews. The Palestinians are free to live here next to us, among us, but they're not free to demand the dissolution of the Jewish state. That is not justice, that is injustice. That's the shortest lecture I can give you about Jewish history.
The Prime Minister of Israel has said is the real problem. No, it is not a Jewish narrative. It is not an Israeli narrative. Even the genuine Arabs, they do agree with that narrative. What Palestinians are doing is mischief, and they are being propped by the Syrians, certain Lebanese, and all other nuisance people who does not want to make Palestinians' life comfortable. They want to continue with this mischief. And these people are so idiotic, so stupid, that they will sell themselves to be a pain, whereas the others, the Iranians, they are enjoying. They don't have a problem. Their leaders, they are billionaires in Qatar. They don't have a problem. And the Syrians and the Lebanese, they are getting some payback time. And the Egyptians know that any more nuisance and they will also get the brunt. So that is how it works. Now, you don't believe Benjamin Netanyahu? Listen to this Arab person and he will tell you the truth.
So 1947, the partition plan was brought by the UN. And what happened is that the Jews accepted the plan, the Arabs denied the plan. And by the way, watch this. It's not the Palestinians, it was the Arabs who denied the land, the partition plan. It was the Arab leaders who decided to reject the plan. Which gives you just a little bit of understanding how even at that time did not even refer to the people in the land as Palestinians, but as Arabs and Jews. The Jews accepted the plan despite the fact that it was much more smaller and without any natural resources. And because of the rejection of the Arab leader, the war began and they lost. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this, because I want to talk about my grandfather. My grandfather got an order to evacuate and get out of his village. Not by the Jews, by the Arab leaders from Syria and Lebanon. My grandfather rejected this request or demand back then. And he stayed and he said, I'm staying in my land. And when the IDF came, no one took his land. I'm speaking specifically about my grandfather. I'm not saying there weren't events like this. I'm just giving you my grandfather's story. And he said, I stayed in my village, which is Ijjish. It's a village in the north of Israel. So he stayed there, and that's exactly how I become who I am today, which is an Arab Israeli. And you know what? I'm very glad about that.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating because you don't hear those stories very often. You only hear about the ones that were so apparently dispossessed. But to hear that actually some Arabs decided they wanted to stay and keep their land.
The majority of the Arabs who left the land of Israel were getting the orders to leave the land by Arab leaders, whether it's from Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, or Egypt. They're the ones who actually went on and just evacuated based on those orders. Again, saying that, we still have to understand that in a war, like in a war, there are terrible things that happens to both sides, and we should acknowledge that. By acknowledging that, we can actually move forward. That's my message, I guess.
So friends, this is what happens when you go ahead and start mischief with your neighbors. And if you do not learn your lesson, you will have to take the brunt of not learning the lesson repeatedly. If Palestinians is consistent with something, they are consistent with not learning their lessons. Look at this map of the 1948 Israel. That Israel was a smaller Israel. And look at the Palestine. That Palestine was a bigger Palestine. But what happened? These Palestinians are not worthy of the land they received. They kept attacking Israel. And for every attack they do on Israel, Israel will attack back and take that piece of land from which they are attacking. And gradually, one fine morning, there will be nothing called Palestine. You can go ahead throughout the world, do all kinds of protests. Nothing will come out of it. Because the Bible says something very clearly. And this time, the Bible is not saying about the river to the sea. The Bible is clearly saying about the river to the river. But this is a different river. The Bible says from the Nile to the Euphrates, it will be Israel. And that is a problem for Iran, because Iran will get a new neighbor, and that new neighbor is Israel. Those days, which is yet to come, there will be no Iraq, there will be no Jordan, and a good portion of Syria would be off limits. The entire land mass from Nile to the Euphrates will be Israel. And what best thing is that the Palestinians go ahead, the Arabs go ahead, fight with the Israelites and lose the land. So how many more battles, how many more wars are supposed to happen? I don't know. But every time they fight Israel, they lose their land. That is the lesson to be learned for everyone. And also to our fellow Muslim brethren, our friends. If you continue to support Palestine, nothing good will happen. But if you try to tell the Palestinians to stay put and develop their region and integrate with the Israelites, be friend with the Jews, it would be better for them. And that is the end of this video. May the good Lord bless you and keep you. Bye for now.